I'm familiar with your backgrounds. You've been in politics a while on all different kind of levels here in the state of California. I know you've done some work at the national level as well. Why? It's a really open-ended, simple question, but why do you want to run for governor right now?
California's given me much. My grandpa got here 120 years ago with a shirt on his back and a dream. And he struggled and made a great life and then went through the Depression and, was part of that greatest generation. I tell people California is a place of endless possibilities. But living here my entire life, I can tell you this, it's also a state with enormous challenges. And I'm running for governor because I'm a problem solver, a proven problem solver. A lot of politicians are good at talking. The one thing I pride myself on is that over the years, I do a lot of listening. And when I talk to people throughout California, people are concerned. They're concerned about the cost of living, the cost of gas and groceries, of eggs and virtually everything else. They're concerned about housing, the high cost of housing, the lack of supply of housing. It used to be that home ownership was a pillar of the American dream. Now, having an apartment with 3 roommates is the reality. And it's a nightmare for too many people. And so I can tell you that I think it's time that we get a problem solver back in Sacramento. Someone who'll roll up their sleeves. You said it, I have been around. I was Speaker of the California State Assembly. Got 2 budgets with a surplus, more money for education and public safety. Later, I did that when California was a purple state, and Democrats had to work with Republicans. I think my first term as Speaker, we had 42 votes. My second term, we had 48 votes. I had to work with a Republican governor, and we did successfully. Passed the largest school bond in U.S. history, one of the largest parks bonds, investing in open space and parks so families could play. Water bond, again, one of the largest back then. I worked with Pete Wilson to pass Healthy Families. More than 1 million children have gone through that program, health care for children. And so I got a record. When I was mayor, LA was one of the most dangerous big cities in America. By the time I left, it was 1950 safe, nearly a 50% drop in violent crime. 1 out of 3 schools were failing. 1 out of 3. By the time I left, it was 1 out of 10, a 60% increase in the graduation rate. #1 American city in reducing carbon emissions, #5 in the world. We made the crane the official bird of Los Angeles. And that's what I'm going to do as governor. We got to build again. We've got to build infrastructure. We've got to address the fact that housing is too expensive, takes too long, too much red tape, but the same for building virtually anything, bridges, highways. As you probably know, Governor Gavin Newsom made me the infrastructure advisor, or czar as he called it, and I was focused on building infrastructure. But it's almost impossible to build in California. I said at the time that if we didn't streamline CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, coordinate and streamline, cut red tape for permitting, and cap the lawsuits like we did for a football stadium in LA and a basketball arena in Arizona, that we would have a situation where California would draw down less money from the feds, from the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, than Texas and Florida. And it came true. So I think we need somebody who's going to roll up their sleeves, someone who's used to working, someone who gets that we got to unite us. Stop screaming Democrat and Republican. Let's work together. I'm too darn, I've been around too long to want to be screaming at people. I think the best thing we could do is work together and build things.
Well, and so you kind of mentioned, your work previously, in Los Angeles and in the Assembly. At this point now, decades ago at this point, do you worry now that the kind of complex situation California is in now, that presents a different set of challenges maybe than it was in the early 2000s?
Well, things have gotten a lot worse since the early 2000s. That's why I'm running for governor. I said I'm a proven problem solver. I'm a uniter. I work with a broad cross-section of stakeholders when I was speaker, so statewide, and when I was mayor throughout my city. By the way, the second largest city in the country. If the LA metropolitan area was a country, it'd be about the 17th largest in the world. And whether it was crime, education, infrastructure, climate action, we were at the forefront. So it's precisely because of what's gone on over the last few years that I'm running for governor. We need a problem solver, not an ideologue, not a screamer, somebody who's going to roll up their sleeves and make the tough calls. Because that's what leadership is. It's easy to scream at your opponents. It's easy to be against your opponents. It's harder to do that with your friends. And these jobs require that. We got to balance our budget because that's what families do with their own budgets. We've got to prioritize our spending. And we've got to make sure that government's doing what it says it's doing. It's accountable, it's efficient, and I don't think we have that right now. So it's precisely because the 2000s started off well, but they haven't gone well over the last, decade or so.
So let's kind of jump into the issues here. I know you kind of talked about some of your main platform points, but you touched recently on the economy and spending here in the state. Obviously, there's been a lot of headlines recently about the dire situation the California budget is in. If you're elected to be governor, you're kind of inheriting a troubling situation with the budget and finances in the state. What are some kind of ways that you can tell voters of how you'll go about fixing that? Some concrete ways.
When I was speaker, we had a surplus. In 2009, we were riding well. I got elected in 2005. We were doing really well. And then the worst recession hit us, the housing crisis, the mortgage lending crisis. And Wall Street said LA was going bankrupt. I said, not under my watch. And I had to make a lot of tough decisions, where I had to take on some of my friends. And by the time I left us on a sound financial footing. I think the number one responsibility of government is safety. Whether you're mayor or governor or president of the United States, keeping your people safe is job number one. Job number two is to spend the people's money wisely, is to balance your budgets, is to not spend more than you have. That's not a radical concept for most families. In fact, that's what we do. But lately, we're spending more. There are too many deficits at a time when we're not in the worst recession. Remember, during COVID, the federal government gave cities, counties, and states, school districts, a lot of money I didn't have that. I had to make the tough calls. So as governor, this state will make sure that our cities and our counties are safe, and we will balance our budget and be clear that we have to focus on bringing business into California. I don't know if you know, but according to Stanford, between 2018 and 2022, we lost upwards of 300 headquarter businesses, corporations that left. So I'm not saying we lost 300 businesses. We lost a lot more. We lost 300 plus that had their headquarters here. You know, I'm a big believer. You got to go, hustle for business. You got to bring business into California, not send them out. And too many businesses have left. Too many people have left. And they're leaving because of the high cost of living. They're leaving because the business climate in the state is really, really tough. And that's particularly true for industries that have all been, the bedrock of Kern County and Bakersfield, and that's the energy industry. So I think what you're going to see with me is someone who understands we got to live within our means, we got to grow the pie, we got to keep people safe, and we got to take on with everything we have, the challenges of housing, homelessness, cost of living, safety, that people really care about.
And so you touched on, there a little bit ago, one of the bedrocks of this community is energy and oil production. And, from talking to a lot of people here, there's kind of this belief, this sentiment that the state government does not care about their industry. As we know, Governor Newsom's really trying to accelerate that move to all electric energy with cars and things of that sort. First part of this question, would you consider yourself a champion of the oil industry if you were to be governor? And two, what kind of assurances can you give them that you will improve that industry rather than trying to limit it like what we're seeing right now?
I think there's no question that this state, over the last years, has not just not been friendly, been antagonistic to an important energy sector in this state. So what I've said is, I'm going to follow an all of the above strategy. Of course, there's nobody living in the world that hasn't noticed, unless they're a Luddite and got their head in the ground, that climate change is here, that we're seeing hurricanes, tornadoes, fires on a scale and level we have never seen before. Now, that means that we've got to treat this issue with urgency, like an emergency. And so what I say to people, in Sacramento, they talk a lot about climate change. I want to engage in climate action. Schwarzenegger used to call himself an action, my friend Arnold Schwarzenegger, former governor, likes to call himself an action hero. I'm not an action hero, but I am an action advocate. We got to act to challenge climate change. And that means we need an all of the above approach. Of course we want renewable energy, more solar, more wind. I just told you, Texas has passed this up and is passing this up on both counts. They're an oil state, but they're focused on solar and wind. Both Texas and Florida have drawn down more federal money for infrastructure. So what I've said is, who are these people who want to take away your gas powered car, your gas powered stove, your gas powered water heater, and we haven't built one transmission line. Who are these people? They want to do it all by electrification when we don't have the grid. We need to build. That means we need more transmission lines. So when I say all of the above, for a good period of time, yes, we're going to electrify. But that means we have to build the infrastructure for it. We need the transmission lines. We need the distribution. If we want, as you know, solar and wind are what they call peak load power. Oil, coal, all those, hydro, big hydro, and other are what they call base load power. So with peak load, if you don't have the battery power to keep them going 24 hours a day, then you have issues. We still need to develop that technology. We're moving in that direction, but we need to do more of that. We need to address the fact that when I say all of the above, natural gas is going to be a transition fuel for a long time. A lot of the extremists who take the position all electric, they're against oil, they're against coal, of course, they're against natural gas, they're against everything. They want, the reason why we're just setting standards and not getting close to completing them is because they let the perfect get in the way of the good. I'm a practical person. I want to get things done. So I want an all of the above strategy that addresses climate and action, not just change. Here's another example. Electric cars by 2035. You saw me drive. I came up in a hybrid. For 40 miles, I have an electric car. After that, I have a gas-powered car. Why? We don't have the grid for that. 3 years ago when we all had to flex, imagine if we all had electric cars. So, we want to get to all electric cars by 2035. We've built 167 charging stations in the last 10 years. We need 2 million more in the next 10 years. So why aren't we building? We're just talking. That's the problem with a lot of people up there, is they talk a great game and then scream at people that don't want to participate in a rigged game, in a game that's not working smart and it's not moving us ahead. That's why I say on all of the above strategy, including small nuclear, by the way. If you want to get to net zero by 2045 or whatever the standard, they're great at setting standards and then not meeting them. When I set a standard, we're going to meet it. I'm a guy that gets things done. I'm a proven problem solver. That's the whole essence of this campaign. A lot of people are going to talk. I got a record of getting things done. And I'm a practical leader who understands, let's bring us all together. Let's bring, these people are talking about closing refineries. We just saw Valero, Phillips 66. You close down these refineries, they produce the cleanest fuel in the United States of America. So what happens? They just 5 days after the national election, when people said the price of gas, groceries, utilities was a big issue on their mind, we moved to make California's fuel cleaner still. Great. According to SC, that's going to cost folks $1.25 to $1.50 a gallon more. There's estimates that we could lose 2 more refineries. That's going to shoot up gas prices in the state. That's why I say, who are these people? 6 years ago, at the Democratic convention, I said we can't just be a party of people that drive a Tesla, and I wasn't talking about Musk. Sure. Let me finish it. We can't be a party of just people that drive a Tesla and not a Toyota pickup or ride a bus like my mother did. At the end of the day, you can't keep on raising utility prices, keep on raising gas prices, keep on raising grocery prices, and not get a pushback. So yes, I'm going to deal with climate change. All of the above strategy. So Kern County is important to that. Bakersfield is important to that. The refiners we have is important to that. And yes, the natural gas industry, solar and wind, all important to that. I don't think there's anybody living in Bakersfield that's against solar and wind power. We just say, we're not there yet. And when I say, who are these people? They have a contempt for the little guy. I grew up with those folks. I know who they are. They're people behind the camera working every darn day to make ends meet. And yeah, we all want a cleaner environment, and we've got to work hard together at it. But to say it's just going to come from solar and wind, these people are smoking something, and it's getting them disoriented, if you will. I want to be a leader that acts on the climate changes we have in this world, but does it responsibly, does it not putting in a way that doesn't put it on the backs of farmers and workers and middle-class people who are, struggling to make ends meet. I think that's why my candidacy from the beginning has gotten some support. I'm not an ideologue. I've been around too long for that. There's no one way to do things. I like listening to all sides. We've got to create a better business climate in the state. It's just too difficult to do business in this state. And we've got to build again. And that means we've got to streamline the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. You could still protect the environment and streamline it. Before you could take 10 years to sue in this state. That's ridiculous. No other state has rules like that. That's why we don't build. And Texas and Florida does. We're going to streamline. We're going to streamline permitting. When I was mayor, I like good food. And when I'd go to other cities, see a great chef, I would say, come to LA. They would say to me, I'd never come to LA. So why not? It says it takes 2.5 years to build a restaurant, to open up a restaurant. And so I did some looking when I got back to town. And I found out you have to go to 12 different agencies. And they have 12 different views of what you need to do. And oftentimes, they're contrary to one another. So I said to people, let's put them all in the same room. Let them work it out. Took it to 6 months. That's what we got to do for building. We got to build faster, smarter, more efficiently. The transmission lines, the distribution that we need. We got to do that with water, infrastructure. We got to do it with housing. And I showed, look, a lot of people from Bakersfield go down to LA. And they're Dodger fans last time I looked. And so am I. And I'll tell you something. They'll tell you from 2005 to 2013, that city was moving. Cranes were all over the place. And I think we got to get back to that. And we got to reclaim our cities. You didn't ask about crime, but I imagine you are. So let me just say this. Took us from one of the most dangerous big cities in America to one of the safest, 1950s safe. In Watts, a place people know pretty well around the country, we used to have multiple homicides in a week, multiple. We went 18 months during my tenure without a homicide, for the first time since I believe the year was 1954. We can reclaim our cities. I'm a big believer when you go up and down and see the crime from San Francisco to San Diego, Sacramento, Bakersfield, Fresno, all of there's a way to, again, it's an all of the above approach. How did we get to 1950 safe? We grew our police department with constitutional and community policing. We did after school programs, summer youth jobs, prevention and intervention programs. We did the whole gamut, not just one thing. And we said from the beginning, if you don't address the little crimes, you end up having too many of the big crimes. I was the only candidate in this race to support Prop 36, the smash and grab initiative. The only candidate. I did a commercial on it. People said, well, you're not reflecting democratic values. I said, safety is not Democratic or Republican. It's critical to reclaiming our cities. And I believe the way we reclaim our cities is to address the crime, the proliferation of drugs. All Prop 36 said, if after 3 different times of getting arrested on hard drugs, each time you don't go to rehab, the 3rd time you do. You either go to rehab or you go to jail. That's not a radical notion. You don't go there forever. Clean up, get yourself together, and then come out. And I'm a big believer in redemption. Come out and, welcome. But safety is important. And I think in too many of our cities, people don't feel safe. Mm-hmm. Again, I got a record on it.
Well, and so kind of from what I'm hearing and talking about some of these issues is that it really seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you almost feel like we have the right idea currently with the state of California right now. It's just going a little too far. And so it seems like, at least from talking to you, that you kind of want to move this more. I think you called some of the ideas extreme a little bit ago. Is it kind of your notion to kind of move things back a little bit more towards the moderate side of some of these policies? Like, you like them, but they're just a little too far.
Actually, I don't like all of them.
Sure. Okay.
There's a lot of things I don't like. I think we need a course correction. Mm-hmm. I think we need a problem solver. Look, there are people on that side of the ledger that have fallen off the flat earth they believe in. Mm-hmm. And there are people on this side of the ledger that are reaching for the pie in the sky that they believe in. And I think most of us are here. Yeah. If you're a farmer, you want to be able to work hard, get your crops out, have the water that you need, have the resources that you need so you can sell your goods. And remember, we feed a good portion of the United States of America. We export. One of our most significant export is ag. We're a breadbasket of the nation. I want to be here for the farmer. I never worked in the fields. I can't say I did, but my grandpa did. And I know this. They're putting the food on our table. We ought to respect that. I've never worked in the oil industry. And at some point, we all know that we are moving toward renewables, but not tomorrow. Let's do this smart. I want to be everybody's governor. People like to put you in a box. When I became speaker, I said, I broke a glass ceiling and people wanted to talk about that. And I said, hold it. I was born here. My mother was born here. My grandpa got here 125 years ago, 123 years ago. I want to be a speaker for everyone. Democrat, Republican, whatever race or nationality or religion. I did the same as mayor. I think we need uniters. I think we need practical people. But no, I don't believe that we're doing everything right. In fact, I think there's a lot broken with what we're doing in Sacramento right now. I want to get us down a course where we're working together. Don't agree on everything. You know, I'm not Pollyann. We're not going to agree on everything, but we're going to move in the same direction. We're going to put the state and the country before our party and work together to improve the quality of life, to restore the luster to the California dream that gave so many of us everything we have.
So I want to kind of shift now to kind of talking about the race. Obviously, you're entering into what's becoming a pretty crowded field at this point. I mean, and obviously a lot of governor's races are kind of that way in the primary. What do you kind of make of the state of the race right now? I mean, there's kind of about a dozen candidates that I think are kind of potentially serious contenders here.
I don't see a dozen serious contenders.
Okay.
There's probably 2 or 3 right now. Maybe 4. I'm certainly one of them.
Sure.
You know, one of the things I've argued from the beginning is everybody's going to talk a great game.
Yeah.
Look, like me or not, I got a record, and it's a formidable record. I'm the only person that's been a chief executive of a city that's bigger than many states. That's a fact. I left it better than how I found it. That's a fact on safety, education, infrastructure, the environment, and the list goes on. So the way I see it, I got to do what I did again. You asked me about coming to the Valley. Last time I ran, I came to the Valley 55 times. I was in Bakersfield, I was in Fresno, I was in Stockton, I was in Madera, I was in Modesto, I was in Mendota, I was in Arvin. I was in small little towns and big ones. I obviously are going to continue to do that. I drove up here on my own. You saw me today. And I'm gonna talk to as many people, and I think people are looking for doers. So I think that's an advantage I have. I raised more money in 5 months than all the candidates together. I did because I think people remember a guy who got things done. So this notion of a problem solver, not an ideologue, someone that gets things done, of a uniter, really important. You can't get big things done without uniting people. Business and labor, rural and urban, uniting the energy sector of, if we stop demonizing oil and fossil fuels and say, they're going to be here for a transition. You know, I don't know the exact transition. It depends on how if we end up building the transmission lines, if we do all of the things we're supposed to do, if we have an all of the above approach. But in the end, it's going to be here for a while. Why demonize them? Why put them out of business? Why put on the backs of working people and farmers in the middle class pie in the skies ideas that are limited because we're looking for perfection, not to get things done. I said, never let the perfect get in the way of the good. And last time I looked, only God is perfect. All the rest of us, you know, we're imperfect beings. So let's get it done.
You know, and kind of circling back onto the race here, you know, we kind of have to ask this because, I mean, I feel like it's almost kind of like an elephant in the room. There's a big question kind of over this race. You know, former Vice President Harris, there's been a lot of speculation that she may get into this race. You know, she intends to maybe make an announcement in the summertime. You know, as someone who's already in and running this race, what kind of challenge does that present to your campaign? Because obviously she's a major player in the Democratic Party. There's a lot of name recognition. You know, how do you kind of, I guess, encounter that situation?
Well, I've been very vocal about it. First of all, I'm the only person from the beginning till today who have said, whoever comes in, I really don't care. But come in. What I've said is, California is the 5th largest economy in the world, a state of endless possibilities, but great challenges. If you're going to come in, understand, it is not a stepping stone to another office. I'm not looking to run for anything else other than governor. I've made it clear. I'd rather be transformative in 4 years than mediocre in 8. And I'm not looking for anything else. So it's not a stepping stone. 2, this is not going to be a coronation. You know, I tell people, yes, she has name ID. She spent $1.4 billion on a losing presidential campaign. And in this state, people are looking for a governor that's going to focus on their families, on their businesses, on the challenges and opportunities that come with California. Not somebody who's looking for the next job. And finally, what I've said is, because those challenges are so big and those opportunities are so great, I think people aren't looking for a candidate who comes in at the end of the rainbow because they have name ID and maybe can raise a lot of money, because we saw a 100-day campaign. How did that turn out for us? The fact is, if you're going to get in, get in. Let's have that debate. You know, let's have the conversation. I'm the only one that's ever run anything. She was vice president. That's a big job. She was attorney general. That's also a big job. But none of those jobs are hands-on like a mayor or a governor.
Sure.
And I'm the only one that has anything like that. The only one that has a history. I don't want to scream at people from the other party. I want to work with them. I know there's a big swath of people here. There are people on the edges, and there are always going to be, but there's a big swath of people here. You know, I tell people, you don't have to agree with me on everything. I like to ask whenever I'm in a room with people and families, I'll say, any of you married? And you know, everybody raises their hand, and I say, you love your spouse. Raise your hand if you love your spouse. Everybody raises their hand. And then I say, raise your hand if you agree with your spouse on everything. And then all the hands go down. So if you don't agree with the people you love on everything, why do you expect that you need to agree with the person you elect to lead you on everything? I think what you want is someone that respects you, someone who knows your pain, your aspirations, your dreams, and someone who gets things done. So, you know, yes, she's there lurking on the edges. I read a newspaper article where some of her people are advising her that she could run for governor in 2026 and then turn around and run for president in 2028. I think we all remember Richard Nixon, who after losing a very close race to John F. Kennedy, ran against Edmund Brown for governor and lost. So look, I don't have anything against her or any of the candidates, a Republican or Democrat. I respect someone that throws their hat in the ring because I know how tough it is. But if you're going to get in, get in. Stop meandering. Stop, you know, the equivocating. Get in. Let's have a debate about energy security, about the cost of living, about the challenges of homelessness and housing and public safety. And I think you'll see that I'm going to hold my own, because I am driving down the lane of a course correction, Let's find that place where we all can come together and work together and get things done.
So kind of one of the final questions I have here is kind of just so obviously we've seen a lot with this administration, with the Trump administration coming in. And even in the first term, Gavin Newsom's been the governor for both those times. And there's been a lot of effort from the Newsom administration to push back against the Trump administration when it comes to these executive orders. We've seen it recently with tariffs. Do you anticipate, if you were to win this election, to be as much of an antagonist against the Trump administration as Newsom is currently?
No. And let me explain why.
Sure.
Obviously, I didn't vote for him. But I believe the best way, because, as you've heard a lot of people talk about the resistance. The best way to lead the resistance is to improve your quality of life. The best way to lead the resistance is to make sure that you're safe in your neighborhoods and in the cities you live in. The best way to lead the resistance is to address the challenges of homelessness and housing and the problems we face in this state. Now, tariffs. Tariffs are taxes. Be clear about that. By another name. They both start with a T. So one thing is tariffs against China. Considered an adversary, they engage in their own tariffs. That's different. Canada and Mexico are our biggest trading partners, along with China. California is going to be hit harder than any state in the country by tariffs. We move 44% of the Chinese goods. So what I've said is, yes, on tariffs, we're going to say, hold it here. I'm standing up for the American farmer, the Californian farmer, who's going to be hurt hard by these tariffs. I'm standing up for the California motorists who already have the highest gas prices in the country. We get a lot of our gasoline from Canada. Hold your horses, everybody. So I will challenge where it's smart to challenge, where I'm defending you. Not an ideology, not a party, but you and your family. That's when I think people in California will expect me to say, hold your horses. We're not challenging some of this. Now, Gavin did allocate with the legislature $50 million. Yeah. The Attorney General's going to do some of that, and that's fine. But I think the governor, when the federal government are doing things that hurt California taxpayers and California residents, that's when I'm going to push back. But I'm not pushing back on every darn thing. I'm just not going to do that. I don't think people elect you to do that. They want you to focus on them.
Well, I think, to push back on that maybe a little bit, is that I think the Newsom administration would probably argue that they are pushing back on things that hurt Californian families. I mean, how would you respond to that? These things when it comes to social issues particularly, with gender identity issues, things of that sort. I feel like they would argue that, these are things we have to do to protect Californian families.
Well, that's what they're going to argue. I'm going to argue, I'm going to focus on the basics. I'm going to focus on, I think that's part of the course correction. We can't put all of this on the backs of the middle class and the working people, the farmers, the people that work with, that shower in the afternoon, not just in the morning. I think my party treats those people like they're stupid. And they're not stupid. They care about the environment, yes. But they don't want you to put on their backs your lack of action on climate change. They don't want you to be limited in how you approach it. They want you to fix what's broken in this state, so they may have that view. And I'm not saying, look, I've always stood up for California values, and I always will. I'm just going to focus on you. And when I say you, I'm talking about you. All the people watching today. Or, I think that's what people are looking for. They're going to push back. I've already seen, I know people that voted for President Trump that don't like these tariffs, don't like some of the things that they see. I've said from the beginning, governmental accountability and governmental efficiency, we should all be for that. I'm going to focus on efficiency in the government. Why wouldn't we? On accountability, your taxpayer dollars are important. We ought to spend them wisely. Now, you shouldn't do that without reviewing what you're spending it on and where the waste is and the fraud is. You shouldn't do it with a chainsaw and not a scalpel. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to scream every time I see something I disagree with. I'm going to focus on the challenges we face. That's the best way to respond to all the noise that's coming out of D.C.
And so the final question I have for you is, obviously it's not a secret. Kern County is kind of a Republican stronghold. It went for Donald Trump in the election. Most of our congressmen are Republicans, and a lot of people here, I think, you may have a disadvantage with them because you identify as a Democrat. What do you say to those voters who may hear, oh, well, this guy's a Democrat, well, I don't want to listen anymore? What's your pitch to them?
Not much you could say. And I think one of the things I learned the last time around, I got a lot of farmer support. I got support from the fossil fuel industry. And I did because people saw me as a problem solver. They saw me as someone who gets things done. I think most people are not ideological. They may be, R's or D's. And I'm not saying I'm going to get the vast majority. If there's a Republican candidate in the primary, that person or those people are probably going to get the vast majority of that. I think I'm going to get the people that get, in the end, the next governor's likely going to be a Democrat. And I think they're looking for one that wants to represent all of us. I think they're looking for a native Californian who knows that California's seen its better days. And we need to restore the luster to that California dream. There's not an Alabama dream. There's not a Minnesota dream. There's not a Rhode Island dream. The only state that has its own dream is the California dream, and it started since the gold rush. And I think we want to restore that luster to the dream. We want to make sure that our kids can go to the UCs. And I'm going to focus on increasing the percentage of California kids that go into the UCs. We want to say that we're tired that the CSUs are turning around upwards of 30,000 students a year. We need to have the infrastructure, the academic infrastructure, the higher educational infrastructure that allows our best and our brightest. We want a state where our high schools, community colleges are engaged in career training and education. Because not everybody's going to college. Some people are going to work with their hands, but we want to give them the skills. Safety is important. I already said it's the most important function of government. Bringing in business, improving the business climate is important. That's what I'm going to focus on. Not the screaming, not looking for perfect, because perfect doesn't exist. I want to get things done. I want to work with everybody. Some people, as I said, yes, there's R's and D's, but I saw last time around, I got a lot of support in the Valley. They said, they kicked the tires, they looked under the hood, and they said, well, guy's not perfect, but he's somebody who's going to work hard for me, for my family. And that's all you can ask for as a voter. And as a leader, that's what you should focus on.